Electromagnetic fields are all around us. They're a force of nature, generated in the fluid outer core of the Earth's crust by electrical currents that flow in the slowly moving molten iron and extending out into space for more than 30,000 miles. Migrating birds use the Earth's electromagnetic field to help them navigate, and some fish have specialized organs that sense electromagnetic fields to help them detect the presence of predators. These naturally occurring fields have been around since the Earth was formed. But over the past 150 years, humans have figured out how to create their own electromagnetic fields, electricity generation and distribution systems, including those big power lines that crisscross the nation, the emergence of electronic devices like radio transmitters and radar, and now personal electronics like mobile phones have all contributed to a dramatic increase in our exposure to electromagnetic fields. But is human exposure to all this electromagnetic radiation safe? That question is one that Dr. Andrew Marino has been studying for more than 60 years. He is a retired professor in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery, Neurology, and Cellular Biology at Louisiana State University Medical School, and the author of many books, including Going Somewhere: The Truth About a Life in Science. Doug and I had the great pleasure of speaking with Dr. Marino last week, and I asked him to begin at the beginning. Here's our interview with Dr. Andrew Marino.
How did you get to where you are right now? Can you trace your history of involvement over the past, 50 years?
60 years ago, when I was a first-year graduate student in physics, I had the phenomenal good luck to meet a brilliant man, one of the greatest scientists of the last century, in my view, a guy named Robert Becker, who was at the crest of his popularity in science because of his new and revolutionary ideas regarding growth control, healing. He was an orthopedic surgeon, and he asked the simple questions: how do bones heal? What starts it? What controls it? What ends it? And what tailors the bone at the end so you don't even know it was fractured if everything goes well? How does that happen? And he would look me in the eye and say, Marino, it ain't biochemistry. It's something more. It's electromagnetism, electromagnetic energy. It's signaling. It's a growth control process that's run by electromagnetic energy, the only force in nature that can act at a distance. He got a lot of grants. He was really hot. He wanted a physicist to work for him. My mentor at the university made a deal. I did my research in that lab and got my PhD doing it, the studies that helped to further explore Becker's theories. I got my PhD and stayed on for 12 more years. The first couple of years, it was devoted toward using electromagnetic energy to stimulate bone growth. At that time, it was the hottest biomedical business in the United States. A company called Electrobiology, by 1982, was the premier small business in the United States. They got FDA approval for using electromagnetic energy to grow bone. Becker didn't want to commercialize his ideas until he had evidence that there would be no harm. That was the first rule for a physician: do no harm.
Yeah.
So he assigned me the job of testing whether electromagnetic energy had any adverse consequences. I set up animal studies. I found adverse effects. We told the government and we told industry about them. Industry told us to go to hell. We didn't know what we were talking about. That was no way to talk to me. And the rest of my life went in that direction. That's how I got started.
Wow. Wow, that's fast. So what kind of effects did you find that you didn't expect to find?
Yeah.
When one designs an experiment looking for effects, one starts with a definition of something that's going to be measured. As the independent variable in the study.
Right.
I picked substances in the blood, weight gain, fertility, whether mice exposed to electromagnetic fields had the same number of mice that weren't exposed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, things that I could measure.
Right.
And I'm planning to say that there's a possible health risk to human beings if the things that I measure are affected by the electromagnetic energy I'm applying. That was my experimental plan. And I did it over and over and over again, published article after article after article, became absolutely convinced that, in fact, the body does detect this energy, and hence it's possible a risk, and it should be studied further, and people should be taught about the possibility of a risk before they make decisions about being exposed, living
Yeah.
near high power lines, for example.
So electromagnetic energy exists in the natural world, right? I mean, we are all electromagnetic beings to a certain extent. We have electrical systems inside our body. How is man-made electromagnetic energy different from naturally occurring electromagnetic energy?
The second part of your question is mostly inaccurate. We are not electromagnetic entities. We are biochemical entities.
Okay.
That's the doctrine today. Don't
Okay.
ever lose sight of that, because that determines everything in this area.
Okay.
There's some electrical processes that go on, but that they're well understood, very simple and very straightforward. It's the passing of nerve pulse from a sensory organ like the eye or the touch or the nose or the tongue to the brain, and that's it. That's the extent that biochemists are taught about electromagnetic energy. If you look at the education that biochemists get, you get a PhD, they get no physics. They don't know nothing about electromagnetic energy, and physicians, they learned only a little bit about a little bioelectricity and zero about electromagnetic energy running the body. So the last part of your question, I can't agree is an acceptable way to.
He can't answer it because it's not a good question. It's
Well,
it's not based on facts, Doug.
Okay, fine.
now the first part was great, and
Okay,
let me answer it this way.
sure.
From the beginning of the universe, I don't know, 15, 18 billion years ago, however long they speculate it came into existence by some means, God only knows.
Right.
Uh, um, from that time on forward, including the evolutionary period for man on Earth, okay, there was an electromagnetic environment that was determined by the magnetic field of the Earth and by cosmic sources. That was it. All of the evolution took place in the context of the magnetic field of the Earth and cosmic sources of energy, which run every frequency interval, low frequency, high frequency, very high frequency, ultra high frequency, as well as zero frequency. Beginning in the 19th century, man began manufacturing his version of electromagnetic energy. The frequencies he used and the intensities of these frequencies, how strong they were beaucoup greater in strength than anything that ever existed before. So it's a completely alien environment for animal life. It began with Marconi and with Edison. So it is something new on the face of the earth. And then when the cell phone came along, it got even newer, because instead of the typical sine wave, now we have very complicated structures of this. You can't say it has this frequency or that frequency, because it doesn't wave. It's pulse. It's a completely different signal. Humans were never exposed to that, anything remotely like that. So, first part of your question was a good one, and the answer is straightforward. It's entirely novel in the human time frame.
So what sort of symptoms does exposure to this electromagnetic energy trigger in humans and in other animals?
Only God knows. Only God knows. To relate a symptom to a stimulus is an incredibly fortunate event and rarely happens. You had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Something caused your heart attack. What was it? That's the answer to your question. There are no symptoms. There are only health risks because the entity, the man-made entity, is biologically active. It matters to your body, unlike, for example, the color of the shirt that you have on. It's blue and green. You wouldn't expect that blue and green is safer than red and white in your shirt color. There's no reasonable link between the color of your shirt and a potential for disease. Not true with anthropogenic electromagnetic energy. Since when we put it on animals, it affects animals. And since animals are physiologically, well, they're not identical to humans, but they're the best thing we have for studying it. If you do that or you do nothing, it affects animals. And it affects animals and produces a variety of different effects depending on what you choose to measure. And it has a particular effect on the stress response system. And for my money, that's the mechanism that connects chronic exposure to man-made energy, electromagnetic energy, and human disease, and overtaxing of the stress response system.
Can you define the stress response system?
The stress response system is a fundamental characteristic of animals and humans, and it consists of a biochemical axis between the brain and the adrenal gland. It's a hormonal system that protects your body against insults. When you're cold, it turns on a shiver response. When you are warm, it turns on a sweating response. And it protects in a million other ways. And it does that by sending hormones through the body, well-characterized hormones, to turn on the response system, the detection system. The fact of the matter is that that system is limited. If you get one stressor, for example, cold, the system is working. If to protect. If you get another stressor, like say poor diet, the system again is stressed. If you get another stressor, for example, a toxic chemical at low levels that doesn't produce any obvious symptoms, but still taxes the body, these things are cumulative, and they reach the point for each individual where a breakdown occurs and a disease develops. What disease? Any disease on earth. It depends on your genetic composition, what you're exposed to, and a myriad other factors.
And the timing of the exposure.
Absolutely. And the strength of the exposure and the other exposures in your environment. This was a theory that was developed by a very famous man named Hans Selye.
How do you spell that?
Selye. Hans Selye. Very famous man, was denied the Nobel Prize because of prejudice that came from the United States mostly, and at that time every other nation's research was following the United States. The United States was king of the hill at that point. This is post World War II. Hans Selye stayed in Canada, ran a clinical system for protecting against stress-related diseases, but never went any further than that. Was not funded by American grant funders because the nature of what research ought to be was already set in stone by the most powerful man in American history, in the politics of science, in the post-World War II era, a man named Philip Handler, the man who was the subject of my present book.
Mm.
He looked at everything as a purely reductionistic biochemical system. He had no truck whatsoever with phenomena taking place at the system level. If you couldn't design an experiment based strictly on biochemistry, then you weren't going to get federal research funds. And that's the rule today.
I was just going to say, I don't think anything has changed.
Right. And I'm hopeful that this guy who just took over, as weird as
Wow.
I think he is going to change that. He recognizes that among myriad things that he doesn't recognize.
Right. The more myriad things that he doesn't recognize.
Yes, yes. But at least, you
Right.
just,
I know. I agree with you. There is a
no one can be
glimmer of
totally
hope.
wrong.
Glimmer of hope that something will move forward.
Yeah.
Ay, ay, ay. Okay.
That's my best answer to your question.
Okay, good. All right. So, so you've been testifying for smart meter legislation, is that correct?
In a roundabout, teeny little way, yes.
Teeny little way. Okay.
I testified once regarding smart meters. In my career, I've testified, I don't know, in the area of electromagnetic fields and the possibility of a health risk. I've testified 100 times. In New York, in New York, I testified, was cross-examined for 13 days. 13 days. That constituted 95% of the time I spent testifying. That was all pro bono. The other 5% was not pro bono. I figured this is stupid. I'm not making any money. And the guys on the other side are really in like crazy. But I started out thinking that an honest scientist shouldn't take money.
100%. Yeah.
Well, that's as my mother would say when I was a little kid, and she disagreed. That's crap for the birds. That doesn't stand up anymore. It doesn't work until you make people pay. They do not realize it has value. Unfortunately, that was my lesson. At any rate, in all of these times I've testified, power frequency, cell phones, other sources of electromagnetic energy, I testified once regarding smart meters. That's what I mean. It's the tippity tip of the iceberg.
Right, right. And yet, as Doug wrote to you, I think, smart meters seems to be, I mean, the installation of a smart meter or 2 or 3 on your home, depending on your utility usage, in many cases seems to be the trigger for this, intolerance of these pulsing, meters that are, putting those, those, I don't want to say, so what are you doing? You're pulsing, data from those meters, but in many cases, those meters are actually also attached to the electrical system in your home. So you have dirty electricity running through the walls of your home. Is that what you understand?
No. First
Okay,
of all,
good.
the dirty electricity is an absurd term, and I have no use for it. It's
Okay.
not makes no sense from the point of view of physics. I know what the guy. I know the guy who wrote it. I know him well. He's a nice guy, and I like him. But it was just a it just added confusion. By dirty electricity, he means things that aren't perfectly sinusoidal. But the whole world has been dealing with things that aren't perfectly sinusoidal since Hector was a pup. So it just added more confusion, another term
Okay.
that made it difficult for people to understand.
Yeah, but see, I mentioned it just because this is what, people are using to support the the proposed smart meter bill in New York State, that they're using this idea that there's, electromagnetic fields, that are being increased inside your home when you
Yes,
install a smart meter.
yes, but that's got nothing to do with dirty electricity. It's a
I, well, I'm learning
uh,
that. Thank you, Andrew.
yeah, the, the smart meters are coming, and no force on earth is going to stop them. Just like no force on earth is going to stop cell phones.
Yeah.
And the people who are sensitive to electromagnetic energy in the environment are simply going to have to tough it out until they can find a way to use political power to get some form of justice. The fact is, the science that Handler handled us at the end of his term, he was 12 years ahead of the National Academy of Sciences. After he finally retired and died 6 months later from cancer, I might point out, the system that he set up in cooperation with industry was that anything industry wanted to do, it ought to be able to do: develop technology, advance the economy, create jobs, and only if and there's no pre-market approval necessary at all, like for a drug, none, nada. That was his idea, and of course, industry loved him for it. It was exactly what they wanted. And he got that system instantiated in our country. So now, unless the product has acute, significant, and obvious consequences, which allows a plaintiff to go into court under a tort theory and collect injuries, there are no rules at all. And I don't know. I'm not taking any position about that. I'm just telling you about the reality of it. The thing that really annoys me is that the government does not tell the public the truth in its stark significance. We do not know whether cell phones cause brain cancer or not. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. That's the truth. Tell that to people and let them do what they're going to do. I certainly don't want to have rules saying you can't make cell phones. Tell people the truth in its stark significance. The government doesn't do that. Why? Because the government represents all the people, you, me, and the people who run industry.
I was just going to say, in the industry guys, right?
Yes, and
Huh?
and those guys don't want the truth and its stark significance told, so the government doesn't do it.
So, in the work that we do with our nonprofit, we don't just have this radio show, but we run a nonprofit, grassroots environmental education, which basically is there to educate the public and decision makers about the links between common environmental exposures and human health. And we try to act as a bridge between the academic research community and the public, which is not an easy thing to do. But we get a lot of calls. We know a lot of people that have died from cell phone tumors. There's a surgeon at Sloan Kettering, that one of our friends, went to. He was in Albany for a few years, and then, the tumor was spreading into his, cervical, spine and so on. And he walked into the office, and the surgeon looked at all the scans, and he says, this is a cell phone tumor. We see them over and over and over. But does that surgeon call up, his senator and say, what's going on here? No, it's all quiet.
Look. I read about your activities, and God bless you for them. But you're going to have to come to improve your efficiency and your efficacy.
Right.
You're going to have to come to a better understanding of the scientific world. If you do, I think it's going to result in you making some changes in the approaches that you follow and the lessons that you teach people who listen to you. Science has three personalities. One is an intellectual activity, and that's what I think you had in mind when you called it the academic community. Okay. That's the activity of the mind. And God, I love it. I think it's wonderful. And I've rejoiced in it. And I'm so grateful for having learned the rules that exist in that area and have had the opportunity to test them and apply them and extend them. But it's an academic activity. Academic activities, by and large, in this world are not funded. Who the hell is going to pay for an academic guy to go in there and pursue his academic ambitions? Science is an expensive proposition. Who's going to pay? The only people who have money are industry
Right.
and the government and the military. Now, the scientists who work for those three are de facto compromised. They owe a loyalty to their employer. The law requires them to be loyal to their employer. Now, they're going to do anything they can to support their employer. Not you, their employer. So the idea that science somehow has got a carved out group of people who are interested in the truth is a figment of the imagination. It doesn't exist. The third aspect, the third personality, in addition to the science as a tool for those three entities, is the fact that it's an adversarial process. When I went into court and testified that electromagnetic energy from high voltage power lines was a health risk, I remember one court, one of the first ones I got paid for. It was a court in New York, Goshen. And I was representing a plaintiff who was complaining that her illness was related to being exposed to very high electromagnetic fields from the power line. Power lines carry energy. Most people think the energy is in the wire. It's not. It's outside the wire. It goes to 300 or 400 or 500 feet on either side. So if you're living near a power line, you're living in this flow of energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for your whole life. Boggles my mind how people can blunder into that and still do it. Anyway, I'm a lawyer. I paid attention to what you have to put into evidence. I paid attention to how you make a point under oath. And my point was that there was a causal relationship between exposure and the cancer that was developed in the client. On the other side, sitting there were 10 guys with suits, ties. One was from NIH, one was from Harvard, one was from Yale, two were from Stanford. Every one of those guys got on the stand and said that everything I said was a pile of crap. None of those guys had any experience. By that time, I had published many papers in this field. I knew every worker in the field. I knew it upside down. Those guys were paid more for their testimony, which took place no more than 2 or 3 hours, than they would make in their job paid for a year. One guy in particular I know, a guy named Abramson, paid $72,000 from NIH to be a scientist for the government, and he gets paid $73,000 in the Goshen case.
Oh, man. Wow.
That's what I learned. I had to take a different tact, and I did. But do not think of scientists as honest people. Be suspicious. Look at them as, when they say something to you, that you cannot trust it unless you investigate. Who's paying this dude?
It's follow the money on the science.
Absolutely. If you don't, you think scientist is inherent honest, you're cruising for a bruising.
Right. Well, I just have to say that, when we start doing our research, first of all, we know enough from, from the people that we work with and from, from people that we trust that are in mostly in the medical community, right? And we trust them and we know what they think about these exposures and the few studies that they have done. And so then when we look at the literature, then we do our deep dive and we look at all the different, studies done by whoever in whatever country. We kind of look for the same, the same results from, I'll have like 7 studies out on a table. What are they all saying that's alike, right? What are they all saying that's consistent in their conclusion or, whatever? That's, kind of the way that we're able to do it because we, and
You're doing the best you can.
Yeah.
There are better ways, but you're doing the best you can. But you should begin by understanding the nature of the system. Your friends will tell you, they'll say, "Hey, Patty, listen, this guy's got cancer from that cell phone. That's what it came from. But he can't go any further. And you need to understand why he can't get any further. And what's holding him back? It's not a slur on him. It's the nature of the system that he's functioning in. A la Philip Handler. He doesn't want to be mocked by the Philip Handlers that are alive today and practicing in medicine.
I get it. Yeah, I get it. But I mean, you can't look at the statistics on parotid gland tumors and acoustic neuromas and gliomas and now the study from Yale, and many studies that support that one as well that are that came up with the same conclusion on thyroid cancers, and say that they don't know what they're talking about. That's I mean,
Patty?
I have to.
You've started down the wrong path.
Oh no! Don't tell me that.
Started down the wrong path. You shouldn't be trying to find out how many papers support this kind of tumor or that kind of tumor. What you should be looking for, is one step removed, the relationship between electromagnetic exposure and cancer. Because you see, which cancer is going to develop depends not on the electromagnetic field alone. You already conceded that all the way in the beginning of our conversation.
Right. I agree. It's the genetic susceptible. What's the matter?
Your strategy is conflicting with what you tell me you have demonstrated you understand. You've got to take a different approach. You've got to marshal the evidence together along different channels, and you've got to triage them based on who paid for the work.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that we know.
There's no sense including the work that was done by the industry because it's going to be rigged. Let me tell you, rigging a scientific study, and listen, I don't mean just fabricating data, although I've known many who work for industry who did that. I've gotten papers from FOIs from the government. Let me take that back. That's going on a toot. I don't want to go on a toot. There's a lot of ways that a study can be rigged. Let me tell you the classic one that I think is going to interest you. Hypersensitivity. Now, I did a study in which I studied a woman who was a good subject because she was a physician, so she could report things in a technically correct way. I showed that she objectively was hypersensitive. How did I do that? Did I collect a whole bunch of people who said they were electromagnetically sensitive and a whole bunch of controls, and then challenge each one, challenge the ones who said they were sensitive and the ones who weren't sensitive, and look for a difference in response. That's the way you would demonstrate that they were sensitive. The heterogeneity in this group of people that have hypersensitivity is enormous. The only way you can determine whether they're hypersensitive or not is to use each subject as its own control. So in an experiment, I take a trial. Let's say it's 10 seconds long. And then there's a second trial and a third trial and a fourth trial. So 100 of these 10-second trials. Now, in each trial, I apply the electromagnetic energy in the first 1 second. And I don't apply it for the next 9 seconds. And then I begin that again for the next trial. First 1 second is applied, the next 9 seconds is not applied. All the time I'm recording the EEG. Now, what I do is I analyze the EEG. For differences between the time the subject was exposed and a 1 second interval in the other 9 seconds where it wasn't exposed. All of my experiments were like that. If I get a difference between those two, I know that the subject responded to the electromagnetic energy. That's the way I did all of my studies. I did about 10 of them on humans for detecting the EEG. For hypersensitivity, I didn't apply an electromagnetic energy. I applied a stimulus that the subject complained about being sensitive to. And if at the end, measuring the EEGs was one factor, we did patient examination and asked them if there was a difference in any feelings that they had when it was applied versus when it wasn't applied. And I didn't tell them whether it was applied or applied. I said epic 1 and epic 2. And if they tell me more often than can be attributed to chance that they got symptoms in epic 2, which happened to be where it was applied, then I knew that they were electromagnetically hypersensitive. But she was used as her own control. What do the guys in industry do? They take the average over all of these, got no chance of sorting it out. They're all susceptible to different things in different intensities. It's designed to fail.
Well,
on the surface of it, it looks like a bona fide study. It's a lousy study. It's a rotten study. It's going to fail for sure. And they did it over and over and over again. Every study you will see in the literature paid for by industry is of that nature. I'm the only one that's used the subject as his own control. It was expensive. It cost me and my department $500,000 to do that study on one subject. Right. So you can see why there aren't a lot done.
So let me ask you this. Are you optimistic that science may eventually find its way? Are we going to be stuck in the handler version of science for the rest of all time?
Well, let's put it this way. For my lifetime and for your lifetime and for halfway through the next century, we're stuck with handler. I'm writing the book now, which I'm going to hope is going to be read at the end of the next century, or the end of this century, and so people can understand how the hell we got here. If you don't understand how we got here, you're going to have no motive to get someplace else, to see what you missed, to see what's wrong. So I'm hopeful at the end of this century, well after you and I are pushing up daisies, I'm hopeful that it will be read and understood. At least that's my shot at immortality, and I'm going to do it.
Good for you. So you know what? I understand everything that you're saying, and I do understand that industry-funded science is crap. Okay, I get it. But we're trying to actually reduce those exposures right now for the 3 kids who live across the street who are 2 years old, 5.5 years old, and 7, who are on wireless devices constantly, who live in homes where there are routers and smart meters and, everything else wireless. I mean, their cars are wireless. I mean, it's a million different things. I mean, I don't have a cell phone. We're hardwired here. We're talking to you on a hardwired system. I lost my cell phone about 3 months ago. It was an old flip phone, and
I'm going to stop recording if that's okay.
yeah. But do you have enough?